Yours.
Good afternoon and welcome to the July webinar, Natural Disasters and the Adjuster. My name is Julie Mendel and I'm the Education Trustee for the SILA Foundation. Before introducing today's speaker, I do have just a few housekeeping items for everyone. This webinar is 1 hour in length and is being recorded. Within the next week, you will receive a link to the recording and a post-webinar survey that we would appreciate you completing. We would like you to mute your microphones and turn off your videos so the focus stays on our speaker. We ask that you put your questions in the chat box and we'll be monitoring those and we'll be posing the questions to our speaker on your behalf. We'll answer as many of the questions as we can in the time we have available at the end of the presentation. Today, Caitlin Small is going to provide an overview of catastrophe adjusters, how the license type might impact filing requirements, and an industry perspective on how the challenges of this unique adjuster license type and how the rise in severe weather events drives a need for adjusters in all capacities. Caitlin is a manager of regulatory compliance at Reg Ed. Having worked in the compliance space for over 10 years, she is a subject matter expert in licensing and registration requirements with a focus on producer, adjuster, reinsurance, intermediary, and agency licensing. She assists the registration and licensing teams with licensing transactions and regulatory issues. She monitors state regulatory changes and liaises with state divisions of insurance on issues that arise during the licensing process. She holds a degree from North Carolina State University and is a member of SILA. Caitlin is the chair of the SILA Adjuster Licensing Subgroup, the steering committee, and has a SILA associate degree since 2020. So please join me in welcoming Caitlin Smith back to our virtual webinar stage.
Thanks, Julie. I'm Caitlin Small. I'm the regulatory manager of regulatory compliance at Reg Ed, as well as the chair of the SAL's Adjuster Licensing Subgroup Steering Committee. And today we're going to talk about natural disasters and the adjuster. I know that kind of the past couple times we've done this adjuster, it's been kind of mainly focused on your independent and your staff adjusters. And there's certainly a lot of information we can talk about those, but we're kind of going to spin this and talk about the catastrophe adjusters. We will touch base a little bit on staff and independents, but mainly kind of focus on catastrophe adjusters, since that's not something we really talk about a lot through SILA or in the adjuster licensing space, but it's still something that's valid that we should definitely keep as part of the conversation. So what is a CAT adjuster? And as much as I would love for this topic to be about this type of CAT, it's unfortunately not about that type of CAT. CAT adjusters are short for catastrophe, or also known as emergency adjusters. I'll be referring to them as CAT adjusters throughout the presentation, just because that's a lot easier to say than the mouthful of catastrophe emergency. But essentially, a CAT adjuster is a person who is qualified to adjust claims, but not already licensed in the state where the catastrophe has been declared, who can act as an emergency adjuster and adjust claims arising from the declared catastrophe. So if you're an individual who is a resident of Texas and all you have is a Texas license and a hurricane hits Florida, the state's going to kind of enact a little bit of a clearer path to get qualified to handle claims in that state. It doesn't mean that you can just go there and do whatever you want. There are certain things you need to do, but it's not going to be as extensive as applying for the full license and having to do fingerprints. The thought process behind this is that when there is a catastrophe that hits a state, it's more so kind of to get people who are qualified in that area to be able to handle the high volume of claims that are kind of come in at a short period of time, instead of having to kind of go through all the requirements needed to get the full the license. So before we kind of dive into those requirements, I did kind of just want to go over just some information about catastrophes in the U.S. in general. When we talk about catastrophes or natural disasters in the U.S., it's kind of on that right-hand side of the screen there, you can see the pie chart of the breakdown between 97 and 2016. And I don't think that's too surprising that a big portion of the catastrophes that have been logged in the U.S. are hurricanes and tornadoes. I think that's mostly what people think about. And that is the case because that is kind of the most frequent thing that hits the U.S. But other things that would count would be wind, hail, and flood damage that's not resulting from a tornado, terrorism, fires, as well as winter storms. Earthquakes would be something that would also qualify on here, but there was nothing that kind of hit the U.S. within that time frame there of the 20 years, but something definitely would qualify in there would be earthquakes. And catastrophes are predicted to increase every year. The U.S. has experienced an average of $18 billion in climate disasters every year over the past 5 years, and that's not really going to slow down. The 2024 hurricane season is predicted to have an 85% chance of an above normal season. And when we talk about kind of natural disasters or severe weather that's impacting the US. Over the 10-year period of January 2013 to January 2023, about 90% of the US counties declared a natural disaster. And we're not just talking about, a tornado comes through and it hits a rural area. We're talking about it hitting populated areas. So that included 95% of the most populated counties. So this is kind of something that does affect real people. It's something that isn't really going to go away, and kind of, every storm season's a little bit different, but there is a guarantee that at least one storm is going to hit and the potential to be a little bit more impactful. Hurricane season is one of those things that you need to pay attention to in the adjuster licensing space. If you're not familiar with it, it starts in June 1st, it goes through the end of November, which we are in the middle of right now. It tends to peak kind of in September and October. I'm located in North Carolina, so this is something I'm very kind of well aware of every year as it comes through. But the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration forecasts that the 2024 Atlantic hurricane season is going to be above average for a couple of different reasons. They're expecting about 17 to 25 total named storms, which is anything from your tropical storm to a hurricane. They're expecting about 8 to 13 of those storms to become hurricanes and 4 to 7 of them to be major hurricanes, which is going to be your Cat 3s, 4 or 5s. And so you might be looking at this and thinking, okay, so maybe 4 to 7 is the number that I need to worry about, but that's not necessarily the case. Every storm is different. And your lower named storms could still do just as much damage as your higher ones. It just kind of depends on the circumstances. Several years ago, Hurricane Florence made landfall in North Carolina as a Cat 1. And, you'd think it's a Category 1. That's not that big of a deal, but it did cause about $24 billion in damages across the Carolinas because it just sat there and didn't move for 3 days and dumped a ton of rainwater on everything. So every storm's different, and they are kind of predicting that this is going to be a little bit busier of a season. It's a La Nina year, which is essentially kind of a weather phenomenon that occurs that makes the hurricane development conditions ideal. So it affects how they formulate the wind and the humidity. And then warmer than average ocean temperatures are another driver of that. So hurricanes love warm water. They love to head towards the Gulf. They follow that jet stream. So those two things combined is why scientists are kind of expecting that this year is going to be a little bit more active than previous years. It goes without saying that I think even if you aren't necessarily a cat adjuster where you're going to have to get registered or licensed, but if you are a resident in one of these states, it's important to just make sure your license is renewed. If it renews during this time frame, your CE is up to date, because I can't tell you how many times I've seen emails come through of people who are like, I need to do my CE, but I don't have power because a hurricane's come through. You don't want to be in that situation. Just make sure you have all your ducks in a row. If you are located in one of these kind of regional states that is going to be impacted, so that you don't have to worry about anything when a hurricane does hit and you have to handle claims that result from that. So I did want to do a case study a little bit on Hurricane Ian. Hurricane Ian hit Florida in 2022. I think we're all very well aware of Hurricane Ian, but Florida is not immune to hurricanes. Over a study over the past 100 years, about a third of the storms that have hit the U.S. have hit Florida, and Hurricane Ian was the costliest hurricane in Florida's history. The stats on that right-hand side of the screen there kind of highlight just the claims resulting from Hurricane Ian alone, which was just shy of about 800,000. I know Hurricane Ian's kind of a little bit of an outlier in the extreme case of, it resulted in a lot of devastation in Florida that resulted in $21 billion worth of insured losses. But it's something that is kind of going to be a fluid situation in terms of the insurance crisis that's in Florida. It's with these storms that hit the state every year, it's creating a little bit of a push and pull in the insurance market, in the sense that Florida has the highest homeowners insurance rate in the nation. I think last year on average, Florida homeowners paid about $6,000 in homeowner insurance premiums alone. And it's also a bit of a risk for the insurers to write policy on homes. If you're expecting a total loss or a lot of damage, it's not going to be lucrative to continue to write policies. So Florida's kind of evaluating what they can do to incentivize insurers to stay in the state, as well as be able to allow those individuals to be able to afford the insurance policies and premiums as well. It'll be interesting to see how this is kind of going to affect as storms continue to occur every year in the Atlantic. And California is kind of experiencing something similar on the West Coast, not with hurricanes, but with wildfires. 8 of the state's top 20 wildfires have occurred in the last 6 years. Most notably is the 2018 Camp Fire that resulted in almost $17 billion in damages. And California has the same kind of insurance issue going on there, where major insurers are kind of pausing new policies, no longer issuing new ones or non-renewing the existing policies in these wildfire-prone areas due to the high risk. But California is actually working on an insurance regulation overhaul that's going to be like the largest regulation change in over 30 years that would go into effect next year. And their main kind of goal is to streamline rate reviewing, allow insurers to use CAT modeling to factor into setting the premium amounts. And their main goal is to create more reliable rates, greater availability of insurance, and stronger oversight. They recognize that this is a problem, that, it is very risky to insure certain dwellings in certain areas, but also that these people that do live there need some kind of help. So they're trying to create some kind of answer to help everybody across the board. And I think it should be pretty helpful depending on how this plays out. So now we've talked about natural disasters and severe weather, let's dive into what catastrophe adjusters are. So like I said earlier, the NAIC lists that an emergency adjuster is a person who's qualified to adjust claims, but not already licensed in the state where the catastrophe has been declared, but may act as the adjuster and adjust claims arising from the declared catastrophe. So you've got the map on the right-hand side that shows where your independent adjuster licensing states are, as well as your staff adjuster states, and then the states that do not have a licensing requirement. So essentially, the emergency provision would be enacted in one of the purple or yellow states. And if you don't have a license in that state, but do have a license in your home state, you can go ahead and there's going to be a couple different requirements that would have to be met outside of your normal filing process, but it's not going to be as extensive as filing a full license. And there are some kind of guidelines that are around what a catastrophe adjuster looks like. So the state licensing handbook does have an exemption to this. If you are a nerd and want to read a little bit more about it, Chapter 18 details it, but it's essentially advises that if a catastrophe situation is declared by an insurance commissioner or governor, registration may be required, but no permanent license should be required of a non-resident adjuster who's being sent there to handle the claims in result of a catastrophe. So essentially, it's trying to not necessarily open the floodgates, no pun intended, but it's to make it a clearer path when you're going to be anticipating a lot of need for adjusters in a specific area to streamline the process so that there's not as much headache or backlog of trying to get individuals licensed to be able to handle those claims. And we do talk about, uniformity in adjuster licensing, and CAT adjusters are their own kind of nuanced license type in general, but there are some general guidelines that the NAIC recommends for each state to kind of follow. One of which is that they would like that the registration or license to remain in force for no longer than 90 days. When you're talking about catastrophe qualifications, it's for a short period of time because it's going to be basically storm specific. So there isn't a need for it to be your full license like you have in, your 2-year renewal cycle. It's going to be a lot shorter, and 90 days is kind of the recommended time period for that. And this second bullet is also kind of a unique thing specific to catastrophe adjusters. When you talk about being in compliance with your fully licensed adjusters, you need to make sure you have that secured and ready to go before you even touch the claim. And with CAT adjusters, it's a little different. There's a bit of a leeway here that within 5 days of deploying your CAT adjusters to adjust claims from the catastrophe, the insurer needs to notify the commissioner. So there's a short window there in which you can send your people out and then submit that filing. It's going to vary by state. But 5 days is kind of the recommendation that you would need to notify the commissioner with just your basic information about those individuals, which is typically going to be the name, potentially a social. I know a lot of states are trying to kind of get away from that. So NPN would be applicable there as well. Name of the insurer that they're representing, effective date of the contract, as well as any kind of catastrophe specific details. And then, of course, if there's a fee that's going to be required, it would need to be deemed at the time of the filing and determined by the insurance commissioner. So this is kind of a side-by-side look at what the main differences between your CAT adjusters and your fully licensed adjusters are. Your staff and company independent adjusters, we're all very familiar with that process. With your home state, you're going to need to do your pre-licensing or your exam. an application is going to need to be submitted. So you're looking at filing it on NIPR or state website, paying that fee, as well as any supporting documentation from fingerprints, maybe a bond, potentially a citizenship documentation. And those licenses are going to be active for about 1 to 3 years. Typically, it's about that 2-year renewal cycle based on the birth month. And there might be continuing education depending on the state that you need to renew that would have to be completed to do that. And CAT adjusters kind of work almost in the exact opposite of your fully licensed adjusters. You're looking at temporary qualifications here. So you're looking at 90 to 180 days. They're typically not eligible for renewal because they're very temporary and storm specific, but there is the possibility for an extension in kind of some extreme circumstances or if there's a need for that. And because there's no renewal, there's not going to be continuing education. And this bullet here for registration versus license filing is kind of, I think, one of the biggest differences. I use registration kind of loosely as a term because every state, of course, is going to be different. But mainly, if it's a registration, it's going to look more like a list filing or uploading and entering individuals on a state website portal, which is going to be different than your license filing. It's the temporary license. It's going to look and feel a lot more traditionally like your staff or independent licenses, where you're going to have an application, you're going to have to pay a fee, it's going to report somewhere, which is different than the registrations, which is more of a kind of a list filing or an uploading that is not going to report anywhere traditionally like on SBS or on the PDB. The sponsorship is another kind of unique thing for CAT adjusters. A lot of the times, a lot of the states are either going to want to see that you are being sponsored by the insurer or by a licensed individual in that state. The CAT adjusters, even though they are qualified mostly from their home state, you are going to these states as unlicensed individuals. So some states do have a requirement that you have to have some kind of sponsorship of somebody who is fully licensed in the state that's just going to kind of sponsor you and make sure that you're doing what you need to be doing. And of course, submission of requirement varies. Uniformity is a challenge in adjuster licensing, and CAT adjusters are certainly not immune to that. And I think that also has to kind of lend itself to when you think about when storms hit, you're not going to be dealing with, 51 jurisdictions or, I guess, and that's producers, but for adjusters, you're not dealing with, hopefully not a nationwide catastrophe, you're more dealing regionally. So this process kind of lends itself to being more state specific because the odds are you're going to be dealing with one state, maybe 2 or 3 instead of a large volume of states. So this is kind of just a high level look at what a life cycle of a CAT adjuster kind of looks like, is that a severe weather event has to occur. An emergency has to be declared. It can't just be, you see on the news that there's flooding in a state, you're just going to go there and handle the claims. That's not how that works. There has to be an emergency that's declared. And then step 3 is kind of these bullet points, depending on the state, can kind of go in any direction. But the main umbrella there is that, the filing has to occur, the registration or license is issued, and then the CAT adjusters deploy. Depending on the state, you might be able to send them out before the filing, but that kind of is mainly those 3 bullets can kind of go in any order in step 3. And then step 4 is kind of CAT qualification expires or is extended depending on the circumstance. So a declaration of an emergency, what is that? Who sends that out? Where can I find information about that? So an emergency declaration, of course, it's a lot of this information, it's going to depend on the state. But it's mainly going to come from some high governing authority. It's either going to be a governor, a commissioner, a Department of Insurance, and it's going to be sent out with a formal kind of information on that. So you're going to get either an executive order, a declaration on the insurance website, some kind of bulletin or industry alert that notifies, yes, the emergency provisions have been enacted in the state, and this is what you need to do if you have CAT teams that need to be sent out and registered. To get notified, there's a couple of different ways for this. If you are a SILA member, the SILA regulatory announcements is a place where this would get uploaded. Usually states will send over, the bulletin that has all the information in it, and that's where it would get uploaded to. NIPR notices, I've seen, when you go in to apply or renew a license, there's usually some kind of alert or bulletin on there that says, Arkansas's got hailstorm, they've enacted their emergency provision, and has a link to the bulletin, as well as your state website bulletins or to sign up for emails. If you've signed up directly with the state, that's another way that you can get notified of that information. And another kind of resource, which I think is a great tool, is if you're a SILA member, to use that discussion board. If you know that there's something that's going on in a state, but you haven't yet seen, a bulletin that's gone out. You can post on there and kind of ask, has anyone seen anything from this state? And then other individuals can kind of chime in of, yes, we did. We asked about this. This is what they said, just to kind of gain feedback if you haven't seen anything official yet, to just kind of keep an eye on what's going on in that space. So this is an example of a declaration from the state of Hawaii last year from the Maui wildfires. And the emergency information this is going to be kind of the golden ticket in what you have to do. It's going to have all the information of, how long it's going to be valid for, what's going to be required. And I kind of highlighted some of the key information in there of what's going to be needed. As you can see, it kind of has the duration of license or registration, which is 120 days. They have to provide a copy of the adjuster's current license. And within 3 working days of the work from the adjuster, that they need to notify the insurance commissioner of the following information: the name of the adjuster. And Hawaii is actually, I thought this was kind of unique that Hawaii requires unlicensed adjusters and call centers not located in Hawaii to provide local contact information. I don't know if that's just because Hawaii is so very isolated that they require local contact in case consumers need to get in touch with someone directly. But that is something to keep in mind if Hawaii is a state where you would need to do this, to make sure that you have that contact information of a local contact or insurer, as well as the non-resident adjuster's permanent contact information as well. And this is another example. Hawaii is a state that's more of a list filing when it comes to the CAT registration requirements. Oklahoma it's going to look and feel a lot more like a license. And so this is kind of what that's going to look like for Oklahoma, where it's, same kind of deal here. It highlights all the information that you need. That it says right out the gate that you need to have that resident adjuster to sponsor the applicant. It's only going to be valid for 90 days from the date the commissioner issues the declaration. And then it also says that you're going to need the catastrophe number. So one of the unique things about CAT adjusters is that most of these registrations or licenses are going to be storm specific. It doesn't mean that, you can apply once for a CAT license in one state, and then if 2 tornadoes hit right back to back, if 2 emergencies are declared, you're going to need that storm specific information. So that's something to kind of keep in consideration when filing this information. Oklahoma is a state where the cost of the emergency adjuster is $15 per declaration. So if it's unfortunate where there's just several that occur, one right after the other, it might be, more beneficial to consider getting the full license, but that's of course going to be kind of carrier specific on what your needs are. And then the other thing that's good to keep in mind here is that the contact information is located directly here. If you have kind of any specific questions, who you can direct those to kind of get information clarified. So this is kind of a high level of what this is going to look like if you had to actually do the filings. And one of the things, if a storm hits, it's evaluating the need for catastrophe adjusters. And this is going to look different kind of based on what your company does or what your needs are, but mainly requirements for allowing emergency adjusters varies for each state, but they kind of fall into 4 main buckets. One of which is to apply for and obtain the regular state adjuster full license. You don't want to have to worry about storms or when that's going to open, that you just want to get them fully licensed. And that, of course, is an option. The full license doesn't prohibit you from being able to handle CAT claims. The CAT adjuster license or registration is only kind of for those that don't already have a license. Your second option is to apply for that temporary CAT emergency adjuster license, which is going to be the one that you file electronically, has the fee, it's going to report somewhere. Or the other option is to register with the state. Depending on how the state handles it, it's going to be that list filing. And there's a couple of states that don't have a requirement or a formal requirement that I'll touch base on in a little bit, that is really kind of going to be, based on what the circumstances at the time the emergency is declared, but they really don't kind of fall into any of these buckets. They kind of are a standalone. But the questions to kind of consider when evaluating the need for CAT adjusters is, what states are involved in the loss area? Do you have enough adjusters that are fully licensed there to be able to handle that claim load, or are you going to need additional individuals to jump in and help there? And which states require a registration versus a temporary license? Is it going to be easier to be able to just file this information all at once, or are you going to have to go in and submit multiple applications for individuals? And are special area passes required? One of the kind of unique things about CAT adjusters is, you're dealing with disaster zones, essentially. These are usually restricted areas that a lot of states have a requirement where you need to have a special pass to be able to get into that restricted area. So that's something to kind of keep in mind of what does that look like for each state? Is it a physical pass? Is it something that can just be downloaded just to show law enforcement or first responders that you are an authorized individual that can get into this area, that you're not going to be there for any, nefarious reasons? And will any state prohibit an out-of-state adjuster? Do they just limit it to fully licensed adjusters, or will they open it to catastrophe adjusters? And then the last question is an adjuster license from another state required? Most of the states that offer this CAT license or registration license exemption, they are going to want to see that you have license in another state. So, if you live in Colorado and all you handle is Colorado claims, it might be a little bit more challenging because you don't technically have a license compared to somebody that is fully licensed in the resident state of Texas, because they are going there unlicensed. They want to make sure that you aren't just a random person that's delivering pizzas on Wednesday and then Thursday showing up to handle a claim on Thursday. They want to make sure you've been vetted in some capacity and that you're able to be sent there to handle the claims appropriately. And so this is kind of just a high level across the country look at what the states require or offer for CAT adjusters, state by state. Like I said earlier, I don't think there's ever going to be a situation, and I hope there's not a situation where every state has to enact their emergency portals open all at once. But as you can see, the red states are going to be your ones that have that quote unquote registration, which is the list filing, registration or temporary permit. And then your green states are going to be the ones that look more so like a license application filing. The yellow states are the ones that don't have that formal requirement. And then of course, the white states are going to be the ones that don't offer that adjuster license at all. So if you have an application that you need to submit for a state that has that license filing, this is kind of what you would expect in that situation. It's going to look and feel very much like handling your fully licensed population. It's going to be a submission that's on NIPR, on CERCON, a state website, or a paper application. And it's really kind of the application window is going to vary depending on what state. You can see on the right-hand side there what that's going to look like, the adjuster license versus emergency adjuster. Some states are not going to have that emergency adjuster option listed unless the declaration has occurred. So if you're trying to apply for a license and you don't see it there, it's very well possible that they have not enacted the emergency provisions yet, and that's why it's not showing eligible to apply for. But there are some states that have it open 365 days a year. The reasoning behind that is if the state's in a state of emergency, they don't want there to be kind of any delay in allowing individuals to apply for that. So they will leave the application open just to make it easier for individuals to be able to apply instead of having to, get in contact with NIPR or their technical staff to say, hey, we need to open this. If, the DOI doesn't have power or the surrounding area doesn't have power, that could certainly delay things. But just because that emergency adjuster license application is listed there doesn't mean you can just apply for that when there's not an emergency, that it will get rejected if it's not truly open. So just be mindful when you're selecting things, that you're selecting the right things. No one wants to have to submit a second application. No one wants to have to deal with, rejection emails or confusing the state on what you want. That it's just be mindful of that when you are selecting what you need to. And another thing that's kind of unique to CAT adjuster license filings is this authorized submitter portion. When we talk about adjuster licensing, it's, the license is the adjuster's property. It's, no matter who they work for, they take that license with them when they go. They can change employers. At the end of the day, it is always theirs, even if they are representing the insurance company. But with CAT adjusters, it's a little bit different. The authorized submitter is typically going to have to come from either that insurance company they're representing or the licensed adjusting firm. So the state of Florida the application has to be submitted through the state website, but it has to be filed through the appointing entity's profile. It cannot be submitted through the individual's My Profile account. It has to be submitted via the appointing entity. And a lot of states, I think, have that in place because they want to make sure that you are being sent there by the insurer. There's nothing, they don't want to get an application from an individual who's claiming they're representing an insurance carrier. They want to hear it coming directly from the appointing entity so that it's not, I'm going there and I'm telling them I'm representing insurance company XYZ and insurance company XYZ has no idea about that. And so that's kind of one of the nuances here with CAT adjusters that you're not going to typically see in the fully licensed realm of adjusters. And then your CAT adjuster registration or list filings, those are going to be a little bit, I don't want to say necessarily easier, but they're not going to be as labor intensive. That you're mainly going to have, most states have a form or a website that you can type this information in or upload a spreadsheet. And this is kind of going to be the main information that you're going to need. So you're looking at personal information, adjuster's name, contact information, NPN addresses, the fee, a copy of the home state license, and then any additional requirements such as your proof of sponsorship. And most of these can be filed electronically, email, state website portal. When I was reviewing all this information for the presentation, I found it was interesting that Indiana wants it to be paper and with a check. And to their credit, I don't think Indiana is hit with a lot of severe storms, that it's very well possible that that will change the next time they have to handle this. But there are some states that still want that to come through paper. So most of them are electronic, which makes the process a little easier. But again, it's that emergency declaration in the bulletin will kind of detail what is required under each state-specific circumstance. So some of the challenges that come with this, it's not surprising, the unique requirements, right? So the NAIC guidelines kind of recommend that this shouldn't be issued for longer than 90 days. That's going to vary, as well as that within 5 days of deployment, the CAT adjuster filing can occur. Wyoming is a state where you need to have that approval before you can send your individuals to the state. So again, it's really going to vary by state, kind of up to them to decide on what's going to be required. So it's not as we talk about the lack of uniformity in the fully licensed realm, but with CAT adjusters, they have their own kind of issues as well. That with the non-uniform requirements, if you are dealing with several states, you might have to do registrations on some portal. You might be able to submit on NIPR, but it's not going to be as streamlined as you would if you had to apply for 5 different state licenses. You can submit them all at once through NIPR. CAT adjusters, you might be using an email list. You might be doing it on NIPR. You might be doing it on a state website portal. It just depends on which jurisdictions are going to be involved, which can make it a little bit of a challenge from a coordinator standpoint to keep all that in track. It's they have varying expiration dates. Some it's going to be the 90 days, some it's 120 days. And if there's going to be an extension, as well as when you're going to be able to deploy your CAT teams in general, do you need to make sure that this is approved before you send them, or can you send them and then file the paperwork afterwards? And, with the 5 days of deployment is kind of the standard. There's a few states that just use the ambiguous term of immediately or timely. So there's not really kind of a definition of what that means. It's just once you deploy your teams, you need to timely notify us. Okay, well, hopefully that's within 5 days. There's not really a solid answer. So it is kind of a little bit of a, unique thing to keep in mind there. But there are kind of some state-specific requirements that are the outliers here. Louisiana has a requirement there where within 10 days of the registration, the adjuster has to certify that they've read the most recent edition of the handbook that the commissioners prepared. This kind of came from a couple of years ago, a storm season where Louisiana was hit back to back with storms that kind of made them reevaluate that, this is going to be something new that individuals are going to have to do. And same with North Carolina. I think this requirement came out, it's been within the past 5 years at least, that all adjusters submitted must complete the catastrophe adjuster certification course, as well as meet any additional requirements underneath that statutory requirement. So when you do the filing for North Carolina, you do have to certify on there that this course has been completed. And then there's multiple states that kind of do have this requirement, is that identification card, pass, or temporary permit, that it has to be on you at all times to make sure that you are within that you are authorized to be in any specific area. And then these states that have kind of no formal notification required, the language is up there of kind of what they've evaluated as, what their requirements are. I don't want you guys to think that, okay, well, there's a disaster that's occurred in Arizona. Caitlin told me I can go there and handle claims. That's not what I'm saying. I think these 3 states don't get hit with significant storms as other states do. But this, of course, is subject to change, that if there is a notice that goes out, it will detail anything that's needed, but they don't technically have a formal process surrounding these. That was a little bit hard to wrap my head around. We talk about compliance and all these requirements that need to be filed. And I was like, are you sure you guys don't have anything? You don't have a formal process that you list on your website? But that's They've determined that if you are being sent there on behalf of an insurer to handle the claims, then, we understand that. And it is potentially going to change in the future, but it is something to kind of keep in mind if something is declared in those 3 states. And then, of course, registration and licensing reporting. I know it's really easy to kind of harp on adjuster license challenges, but we do get a little bit spoiled in the fully licensed realm of you can just pull a PDB and it's got all the information you need, right? It's got your issuance date, the expiration date, whether it's active or not. CAT registrations and licenses don't work that way. So if you have a registration state, you're looking at the online portal. It might display the expiration date. I have the lists of the SBS reporting and the PDB reporting. You can see it does report, but it does not list an expiration date. So there are some that with the license filings do that you can pull on the PDB. You review on SBS or CIRCON, but for the most part, it is a little bit of a challenge to keep in mind of when that 90 days starts, when does it expire. And most CAT licenses or registrations are only applicable for that named storm. So if there are subsequent storms, a new filing will need to be submitted, which can kind of compound the problem if you're trying to keep track of when that 90 days starts for one storm versus the other, that it is something to kind of factor into the decision of should we go ahead and proceed with having our CAT team, or do we just get our individuals fully licensed? And some additional challenges in this CAT space are going to be your multi-state CAT events. So, you're talking about having to straight line storms that affect several states, having to do several filings at once instead of being able to just submit several applications via a state website or through NIPR. And then, of course, the time period to notify states of claim handling. Expiration dates are going to vary from the CAT registration or the license. And then managing claims after the CAT registration or license lapses. I know this has kind of been discussed from just around the industry of it can be a challenge for adjusters that have been deployed to handle claims that result from a catastrophe. And then a year down the line, they get a phone call that says, from the person they replaced or managed the claim for out of a hurricane is saying, can you handle my claim from a car accident? It doesn't give you free range to do that. That is something that is outside of the catastrophe. It will require that full license if it hasn't already been secured. But that is something else that people kind of weigh in when they're looking at CAT registrations or licenses. And some events can affect independent and staff adjuster license requirements. So if you're on this webinar and you're thinking this is all great, but I don't deal with CAT adjusters, I only do fully licensed adjusters, it still is important to pay attention to this kind of stuff. Hurricane Harvey in 2017 was a very powerful storm that the state of Texas kind of amended some of their licensing requirements in that time frame. It allowed for late renewals to occur for the individuals that were due to expire within that time frame, to waive the late fees, waive CE penalty fees, extend the CE window, for the same reason that they opened the CAT adjuster registration to begin with. That it's to make sure that you don't have to worry about kind of the filing process of keeping that license active. They want to make sure that the people who are qualified to handle claims can still continue to do so. So sometimes states will make some changes in the licensing process for fully licensed adjusters. Same was the case with Hurricane Ian, that Florida temporarily amended their CE requirement to grant an extension for those that were due to renew within that time frame, just to make sure that their licenses could stay active and they weren't going to have to worry about, okay, now I need to do CE and I have all of these claims that I need to handle. How am I going to balance this out? And I think it's important to note that, we think about natural disasters and severe weather when it comes to adjuster need, but there's also non-weather related emergencies. COVID-19 was kind of a unique, and I hate to say unprecedented time, because I think we're all sick of hearing about that, but it was a situation where emergency provisions weren't necessarily enacted in terms of affecting, CAT adjusters, but it did affect licensing in general. It resulted in extensions of CE completion and deadlines, created temporary licenses, and waived some fingerprint requirements. And then also there's the technical component too. Cybersecurity is a very hot topic of discussion in the industry and outside of the industry. That when New Mexico had their cybersecurity incident last year, they had to extend renewals as well as CE completion deadlines by several weeks due to renew due to the impacted time frame. So it really can, this is stuff that's, we talk about how hurricane season is coming up and it's anticipated that there's going to be storms, but it's an ever-changing kind of situation, and every storm season looks a little different, and it's kind of to be prepared for the unexpected, no matter whether it's weather related or non-weather related. So I did just want to give an adjuster regulatory update. That's not specific to CAT adjusters for a couple states of things that have changed. I know that we usually give this update. It will be given again on the quarterly SALS meeting, but some things have changed in the past couple months. Connecticut, effective October 1st, is going to transition to a 2-year renewal cycle. Currently, their adjuster licenses renew June 30th of odd years, and they're going to transition in October to a 2-year birth month renewal, so that it kind of realigns with most of the other states that have that rule. I know Connecticut is currently working on kind of what that process is going to look like, so there will be more information to come as we get closer to it. They're just kind of figuring out the last minute details of how they're going to implement this change and make it kind of streamlined for everybody. New York currently has a pending change on the table that to waive the exam requirement if an applicant holds a claim certification from a national or state-based claims association. I think I've said this before, this one comes up every year and it works its way through and then it normally fails, but this one's still in the review process. So this might be the year that it goes through. Keeping an eye on that. Rhode Island, I think we all are, I'll say, I don't know if we're all excited about that. I know CE is a bit of a contested topic, but they recently have adopted the new CE requirement, which is going to require it for their resident and DHS adjusters for the 24 hours, including 3 ethics every 2 years. They are going to be releasing notice or details about what that looks like and how that's going to impact existing licensees, but that just has not been released yet. So that should be coming within the next month or so. And then North Carolina, just actually a couple weeks ago, has repealed a section of their language that North Carolina was a state where you could not hold a producer license and an adjuster license simultaneously. And they recently repealed that effective earlier this month. So if you do have a population of individuals who I know I've seen this where they were a producer at one time and now they have transitioned to an adjuster and they don't want to get rid of that producer license. Previously, they had to if they wanted to get the adjuster license, but now they're going to be able to keep both. So that's going to make life a little bit easier for a handful of people. And I did want to talk about some additional adjuster educational opportunities. We have a pre-conference class through the SILA Foundation, the Adjuster Licensing Advanced class. You don't need to be a SILA member to attend these. They're open to the public. So if you are interested in learning more about adjuster licensing, I will be teaching it as well as Melissa Britton from Adjuster Pro. It is a 4-hour class that's split over 2 days. But it's going to cover adjuster licensing basics, as well as some tools and resources, and a lot of kind of scenario-based case studies. I helped facilitate this last year, and it was really great. We had a lot of good discussion with regulators as well as industry members. It's a great way to kind of collaborate and learn from one another and kind of tackle some challenging issues that are likely to be seen in the adjuster licensing world. There is a prerequisite to have completed the adjuster licensing basics course online prior to the class, but there is an exemption if you have a 3 years experience of adjuster licensing. So if you are interested, I think Mary Ellen's going to provide the link in the chat, but there's also the link on the screen and the email, or if you shoot me an email, we can get you in the right direction to get registered for that. Registration is open up until 48 hours prior to the start of the course. So there is some time if you want to think about joining that. And then there's also the SILA National Education Conference. It's in San Diego this year at the end of October. It is a wonderful location. It's the same hotel that it was held at 5 years ago. So if you were there back in 2019, it's the same location. And we have 2 adjuster licensing sessions. So the first one's going to be about, is the adjuster licensing a smooth sea, never made a skilled sailor? If I could say that 3 times fast. And that one's going to be more of a panel based of regulators and industry members kind of detailing, when technology changes in the adjuster licensing space, that there's always a lot of positives that come with that, but there's also challenges. And so it's going to be kind of a discussion of how to navigate those, what that's looked like over, the past year or so with a lot of the different changes that are going on. And then Tuesday is the Adjuster Open Forum, where it's more of kind of a free form session. It's not structured very well. It's got an open mic situation where if you have a question, you want to pose it to the audience, to get in front of regulators or industry members to say, I have an issue with this, or I'm struggling with this. What do you guys do? That's going to kind of be the place. It's a little bit more informal, and there's usually a good conversation that comes from that. And so with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Julie, because that's all the information I have prepared today.
Okay, I don't see any questions for you. You covered an awful lot of information. So I thank you so much for sharing your expertise. This is a very challenging and extremely timely topic. Thank you for being such a fantastic friend to SILA and the SILA Foundation. We appreciate you and all your time this afternoon. As a reminder for everyone else, our webinars are free of charge. They are open to the public, and we appreciate you sharing your invitations. We want you to watch for and complete the post-webinar survey. And there will not be an August webinar. To Caitlin's point, we have a whole bunch of pre-conference classes in August, 6 in total. The link is in the chat for anybody that wants to link directly from here. You can also find the information on the website. And we will have two webinars in September. So if you're working towards your designation, you still have 2 opportunities for webinar credit towards designations and towards your CE. So we will hopefully see you at our pre-conference classes and in our September webinars and our October conference. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.